So here you have literally Paul explaining how Abram becomes Abraham and a Christian, because what's happening is he's trusting in what Yahweh is explaining to him. Now, where's the gospel? Because belief isn't enough. It says in James, the demons believe and they tremble, right? And we've talked about repentance, we've talked about grace, we've talked about those things right now. But let's keep going in this one. The word covenant in the Greek means literally to divide by a sacrifice to secure the promise. Just think about this a minute. When you hear, today we have something called the New Testament and the Old Testament. What it really was called was the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. We give it the word testament. It's really covenant, right? So God has an old covenant and then a new covenant that comes at the cross. Now, it's not a contract or a commitment. This is what we're used to. We're used to stuff like this. Because the problem with contracts and commitments is they're just obligations, and we break them all the time, don't we? I promise to keep my kids' stuff. Do I always keep my promises to my kids? You can say no because you know yourself, right? So it's not a contract or a commitment you make, because we break those all the time. When we look at verses 5 to 7, what's happening here is God is securing his unconditional promise to Abraham. He's making an unconditional promise. He's telling him, so shall your descendants be. He's not saying your descendants might be this numerous depending on how well you behave. Or this might happen, it all depends on you. He says it will. This is going to happen. And Abraham goes, I believe. I don't believe your promise. I believe you. You said it. Your promise is just an occasion for me to believe. That's what God does when he gives us promises. Our faith is not in promises. Our faith is in him. And the promise is so we can exercise our faith. Because what we care about is God's character, who he is as a person. Does that make sense? So, he says in verse 7, I brought you up out of Ur of the Chaldees to give you this land. He asks a question, Abraham, how shall I know I'll inherit it? How am I going to know? See, it's kind of cool, isn't it? You can talk to God and these things, right? You don't just have to take things by faith. You can actually ask. And God, the way he answers them is really weird. Well, how am I going to know I'm going to inherit them? Go get some animals, start cutting them up. Well, no, I didn't ask that question. I just wanted to know, how am I going to know? What he's doing is he's setting up the covenant. And what he means when he does this, by separating animals, is because he's saying, you know how you're going to know? Because I said so. Here's how you're going to know. You don't need evidence for this, because I said so.